So the good news today is I'm back amongst the living. I'm not quite as dead as I was on Monday. Thanks for bearing with me, sick as I was. The only bad news that I have for you, not that any of you really show up to my office hours, but I have to cut my office hours short today. I'll make them up next Wednesday or next Monday. I'm kind of here all the time anyway on Mondays and Wednesdays, so you'll probably be able to find me anyway. But I have to make the official announcement that I have to leave early today. So I won't have my regular office hours. I'll only have the first half hour of them, and then at 2:30 I'll have to disappear. So we're going to continue in the world of Illustrator today. We're moving in the direction of your assignment 104s. So you're starting to have enough skill with the pen tool to where you could start working on that in the background. If you wind up with extra time on any of the next couple class days, it wouldn't be a bad idea to start. Next week, I will do a kind of an overview lecture of the Charlie Harper images and kind of how you would go about doing it. So it's not necessary that you start today. I'm just kind of forewarning you that that's coming. So anyway, today we're going to talk about logo design, which is kind of the next step of the pen tool. We'll use a tool that's called the Pathfinder tool to be able to combine shapes together, subtract shapes from other shapes, that kind of thing. And logo design is a really good place to work with this. How many of you have taken 130 already? Don't you have to do a logo in 130 still? Yeah. So you probably already have a logo that you worked on. Now it's your chance to kind of rethink it and maybe improve it. But logo design is definitely a talent, and it's definitely something that is critically important down the road. If you're an architecture firm, you have to have a logo that represents you well and kind of identifies who you are. So an effective logo is distinctive. It's appropriate for whatever it is that you're doing. It's practical. It's very graphic. It's generally simple in form, though some logos can be a little bit more complex. We'll show those examples as well. And it generally conveys some kind of an intended message. And it really becomes the iconic brand of who you are. And we're going to talk through a bunch of very successful logos and why they end up being very successful. My guess is that every one of these you've come across and you would recognize if I showed you that logo. Right? Maybe the hardest one would be the one on the end for the younger crowd, right? The Rolling Stones. I think it's kind of borderline on how many people would necessarily know it. But what?
I said they're an old group, but I'm sure everybody would.
Well, yeah, but I don't know. Depending on demographic, you might not recognize the Rolling Stones. But generally speaking, the rest of these are very iconic, very simple, very easy to identify, and that's what makes a really good logo. Clearly, a logo we would all recognize, though 20 years ago, not a logo we would recognize unless we were living in Seattle. A little bit more complex in its actual design, but still the same, lady with, simple two-tone green, white. We recognize it, right? We see it everywhere. It's kind of obvious that this is a Starbucks logo. We don't even have to see Starbucks anywhere. We just know that this is Starbucks. And so that kind of level of association is really critical to a logo design. If you can get to the point where you have just a logo, no text, no anything else, and you can identify that brand, that's achieving a really good point. So generally it needs to be very easily recognizable, which means it's unique, which is the other big challenge of logo design. It needs to be fairly versatile in that it can show up really small on something and it can show up really large on the side of a building, and you can still find it interesting, find it graphically memorable, so to speak. And it's going to sometimes have something that's a little bit interesting, something that's a little bit unique. I tried to pull out, mixed in with the big brand name logos, a bunch of other kind of sidebar logos that I think are really kind of creative, but not ones that would be in the mainstream yet. But at the same time, they're pretty good examples of how an iconic logo can stick with you, right? Something that's creative and kind of fun. So depending, they can be kind of creative. Okay. The other thing about it is you want to think about a logo as being something that's enduring, in that you don't want to necessarily follow a current trend or a current fad. You want to make it, quote, future-proof, so that if this is you as a branded company, and take the NBC Peacock logo, right? That's lasted for whatever, 80 years, or probably not that long, 60 years. And so you have that logo, and can that transition, and can it actually last? So you want to think to the future. So this is a good example. Okay, 1976, this was Apple Computer's logo. right? Probably not something that was particularly future-proof, right? So Apple rethought it, and so from 1976 to 1998, pretty long stretch, Apple had its rainbow Apple logo. But if we take this first one off, and we look here to here to here, it's shockingly consistent for that 1976 to 2014 time period. And so you can see the transitions, right? 1998 to 2000, they went to the monochrome black Apple. Then they went kind of chromy and embossed, so to speak, for a while from 2001 to 2007. And then we get to our current Apple logo. Though I think I should probably update it because it's getting even flatter because of changes in UI design. So the logo design process, how do we go through this? Generally, it's going to begin with some kind of a design brief. Today, you're going to basically be writing your own design brief because you're going to do a logo for yourself. But if you were doing a logo for a client, they would come to you and say, look, I need a logo. This is where my logo is going to go. This is kind of what I'm thinking, kind of general ideas. This is the industry I'm in, that sort of thing. You would then go out and do a bunch of research about what is this company? What do they do? What are the typical logos that are used, right? Reference kind of snowballs into what other companies are out there, who else is using them, that sort of thing. Then you're going to do a bunch of sketching and conceptualizing, a bunch of different ideas, try to get those ideas out because it's going to take a while to come up with what the correct logo or the right logo is going to be. Then you're going to go back and reflect on all those ideas and say what's the best one, distill it down, and then ultimately present it to your particular client. And so there's a variety of options out there in terms of how you play with certain ideas. This is a little bit of a circle in terms of how much time each of these steps take. This was done by the Just Creative Design Company, who do logo designs and that sort of thing. So you can see sketching and conceptualizing is really the big piece of the puzzle, and you're not going to get good results unless you do that. But then research is also important. Revisions are also important. So we have that big chunk in the middle of the actual design process. So how does one of these design processes really work? And so this is a step-by-step of how a logo might be created. So in this case, the company took the fist and they wanted to make this into a logo. So they conceptualized. They started sketching. They started saying what's appropriate, what looks right, how am I going to abstract this into a recognizable logo. So they continued to sketch it and refine. So if we look at the first, this is a very natural sketch. What if we started to simplify the shapes, right? So we're seeing just consistent shapes. What if we simplify those yet another step further, right? Then how do we start to build it in Adobe Illustrator such that we get this sort of shape? So they start to build it, start the rotation, that sort of thing. Add a little bit of white borders, and then we end up with what is, quote, the final logo. And so we took the abstract photograph and we just kept going more and more abstract into shapes to create this as an actual logo design. And then they start to talk about how would we add text to it and how does that fit in. The text that they're choosing has to have a certain consistency with the logo shapes themselves so that they go together. And then you end up saying, okay, what is a color version of this look like versus what is a grayscale version versus what does a black and white version look like, right? And so how do those work together? Because there's certainly going to be things that are printed that are going to be in just black and white. And so how does the logo work in just black and white versus color? Those are all important things. And then what might it look like if we interpret it all the way out to a full set of stationery with business cards and all that paraphernalia, and how it might work as letterhead and that sort of thing. And it's a good way of kind of thinking through this process. So this is a fictional company, but it shows you the process of creating the logo design. So going into each one of these steps in a little bit more detail, the design brief is really, you're going to question the client and find out what they want, what their interests are, why are you doing this logo design in the first place. For you guys today, you're going to be questioning yourself, right? Why am I doing this logo? What am I trying to represent? That kind of thing. You probably did a little bit of that in 130 when you created your logo then. You're going to be going through the same process today. You want to make sure you're including, like, where do you want to use this, right? Is it going to be printed on a t-shirt? Is it going to be on letterhead? How does that kind of work out? And how versatile is it for that purpose? It's also a good time to discuss what you're going to charge to do this if you were a logo designer in the first place. Obviously, you can charge yourself nothing today, so you're lucky, right? You get free design today. I do apologize. A lot of these slides are a little bit blurry because the images are taken off the internet, but I think there are a lot of good examples of kind of how this stuff comes together. Then you move into the research phase, and this is really important, is there any trend in the industry of what these logos look like, right? So if you're trying to create a logo for a personal landing page, what do the other personal landing page logos look like? If you're working in the architectural industry, what do all the major architecture firms' logos look like? That's a good place to start because it'll give you like what is the trend, what do they look like? And so if you're doing a logo for yourself today, a good place to start might be to do a Google image search of all the big architecture firms and what their logos are, right? As a way of kind of trying to identify what's appropriate in that particular industry. You want to think about, do you have a history of previous logos, and therefore is there a natural transition from one logo to another? If you did 130 and you liked your logo, is it natural to want to use that logo and just tweak it and make it better? Or do you want to start fresh like Apple Computer did in 1976 where they had one logo and they said, oh my God, this is horrible, and they changed it, right? You want to think through that as well. Investigate competitors, right? And I guess in this sense it could be all of the people around you. What are their logos like? So don't be shy about looking over somebody's shoulder and seeing what they're doing, because that's important as well, right? Then you're going to get into reference, right? Sometimes it's good to just look for successful logos. We have the power of the internet. Life is fantastic. It's really easy. But think about all the things that you encounter on a daily basis, right? On the backs of every one of these monitors is the Dell logo, right? That's been the Dell logo for as long as I've known Dell. And what does that tell you, right? Do you like it? Do you not like it? That kind of thing. Obviously, Apple Computer, Starbucks. We look around the room. There's a Pete's Coffee. What does Pete's logo look like, right? Pretty quickly, you can get through a lot of logos and kind of think about what's appropriate and what's not. The other thing you want to think about is what current design trends are being employed. We went kind of in the mid-2000s through 2010, 11-ish. We had a major shift in making objects look 3D in computer. There was always shines, there was always little shadows for icons, for logos. It was kind of an ongoing trend in that era. And then the design community kind of shifted into what they call a flat design, where they took the shadows away. Long about 2011 or so, it didn't really catch on in mainstream. Designers were doing it, and people were saying, "Why are you doing that? I want it shiny. I want it to look more 3D." And it didn't really take off until Johnny Ives changed the iOS on iPhones and iPads and that sort of thing to be iOS 7, which was the first big stream company switching to a flat design, a flat UI with no shadows. When that trend happened, it became okay for everybody to do it because they kind of set the bar as this is the new standard. So we had a major shift. All the websites changed. They didn't have shiny little ribbons anymore, no shadows. So there's definitely trends in the graphic design community. It's worth paying a little bit of attention to how those play out. So then you move into the sketching and the conceptualization phase. This is really where you play around with a bunch of different logos. Today I'm going to ask you primarily to sketch on the computer, though if you feel more comfortable and you want to do some hand sketching, by all means do some hand sketching. There's nothing wrong with that. To try to get some ideas out, fall back on your intuition. Is this looking right? Do I feel right about this? Look back at your research, look back at your reference. Does any of that kind of make sense? And then you're going to produce a bunch of ideas. And so here's an example of a bunch of sketches where a graphic design company was trying to come up with a logo and what was appropriate. They sketch out a bunch of ideas, and then they start to say, okay, what's it going to actually look like? And they start to conceptualize in that sense. So in this case, how did they create it? Again, in Illustrator, a series of curves. They're going for more of a 3D look, and so they're trying to see how the shape is going to come together. And then they work through a series of gradients to transition blue back to blue to get this kind of color gradient working, and you can kind of see how it's working. But they're playing off the shadows to create this kind of 3D object in this sense. Then they play around with fonts, which is another kind of critical piece of the puzzle. What's the right font? Just because the computer's limited to a certain number of fonts doesn't mean that that's the right font. So in this instance, they're playing with avant-garde, Futura Heavy, and Century Gothic, all of which look very, very similar, right? But there's subtle differences. And so you're trying to pick what's the right one for this particular design logo. And that really can start to matter. In Illustrator, just like in InDesign, there's a way to create actual objects from the text. So if you want to use those as objects, I'll go through how to create that today. So in this case, they created an object from the text and allowed it to kind of propagate into the actual logo itself. And then you start to think about what different ways can the logo be used. Is it going to be used on a black backdrop? Is it going to be used on a white backdrop? What if it's all grayscale? What if it's black and white? How do you change it? Obviously, the grayscale version doesn't have the shadowing anymore, but a little bit of subtle white lines helps that three-dimensionality come through. So you have to think through those different options, right? Then you want to step back from your work and reflect on it. What does it look like? Is it appropriate for what we're trying to do? That step back is always critical, whether it's architectural design, industrial design, graphic design. You always have to be able to step back and look at your work fresh. Is it really doing what I want it to do? It's also a great time to ask the people next to you, and I actually, in exercise 117, specifically say, ask the person next to you what they think. You guys, it's really important as you move forward in the world of architecture or design to start interacting with your neighbors and really seeking their advice, their opinions, because it's a great way of improving your own work. That kind of feedback is really critical. So I'm asking you specifically to do that with your neighbors today as part of this exercise. You get your feedback, right? Think about it a little bit. How can you tweak what you're particularly working on? How does you make it a little bit better? Let those ideas mature, and then really kind of cull out what looks appropriate. So I'm going to keep showing a bunch of examples here, some of which are more creative than others, some of which I really like. I like this grab it because it's the two hands, but then it also has the little rabbit is the negative space. So sometimes those plays can be really good. This was a Japanese beer company, pretty iconic design. I don't know what the beer company is. I don't even know what the name is, but it would certainly be a recognizable piece. Right, presentation. You want to. This is when you get to the client period. You today are presenting to yourself, so you don't really have to do a presentation. But this is where you're going to distill down what's the best idea, and you're going to present that to your client, and you're going to try to convince them that this is the right one. Sometimes they'll say, no, I want to see all the other ones, which can be a bad idea because they can go off on a different tangent. You want to, kind of focus on which one is the important one. If the client doesn't like it, obviously you're going to go back and try to rethink it. A bunch of logos for the Mall of America, different strategies based on the same kind of general shape. They're just changing colors. You've got the primary logos. You've got the logos that are a little bit unwrapped for different applications. As we come down, different color palettes that are acceptable. Down here, they've got the seasonal changes in the logo, which can be a different way of thinking about it. They have the holiday season one, they have the Valentine's Day season one, they have the 4th of July season. So you can change the logo based on something like that, which is another idea. And then these are kind of background patterns and stuff that would be appropriate. So it's kind of a more thorough look. So the other thing is you want to learn from others and you want to see why they succeed. Okay, so I would argue that this particular logo is probably one of the most enduring, simple logos that's out there. Everybody knows what this logo is, and this logo has not changed in however long they've been around, I think since the 70s. So talk about an enduring logo, something with absolutely no text next to it, just a simple, what they call the swoosh or the check, is all that it takes to be that iconic. So if you could be that successful and that iconic, certainly you've done a very good job branding yourself. Right? Typography is also really critical in logo design. Not all logos have type. A lot of logos do have type, and even a lot of logos are type-based. So thinking about what font you're going to choose, what the letters actually look like, is really critical to creating a good, successful logo. Is the font going to go out of style? I used the example in the typography lesson about papyrus being really hot in 2001 and 2 era, and now if you looked at it, it would look really dated. You want to think about that when you're designing with fonts in mind. So you may have to make your own font to get the best results. You may have to make your own letters. It just depends. You can, of course, on these computers, load your custom fonts, just like we've talked about before. So if you don't like the fonts that are on the computer, go find one that you do like and use that one instead. Little details matter. Don't forget about kerning and tracking to clean up those letters and make them look great. So a lot of logos are text-based. These are kind of the common ones. FedEx, IBM, Coca-Cola, CNN, Disney, right? There is a distinct Disney font, right? They branded that. NASA is pretty distinct. At the same time, some of these have graphic elements that are hidden in. You guys are aware of the hidden arrow in FedEx? You seen this before? Right? There's a white arrow right here, the delivery arrow inside FedEx. So a lot of times there's a creativity that goes into these logos that even though it's a distinct font, you'll never look at FedEx the same way, right? There's a certain creativity that can happen in these logos that a lot of times goes unnoticed, but it still becomes very iconic. So you want to think very carefully about this and what your font choice is, because you're going to be kind of limited. And so we'll continue on with a bunch of examples of how things have come together. Again, I apologize that some of these are a little bit fuzzy, but they can be very clean. Something like this is Oklahoma Contemporary. I believe it's a design firm. It would make sense that they have a very contemporary, clean design. Right? There's not a lot of extra going on, but it's very, very clean. Right? The big thing is to avoid all the cliches that are in logos. Because your logo will look very clip arty, and if you're using a clip arty logo, it's always going to look clip arty. So you want to say no to Microsoft Word's clip art gallery, because that's not going to succeed. No light bulbs for ideas, no globes for international. Right, that's all been done. So you want to avoid that kind of stuff. Or if you're going to pursue something like that, maybe you want to interpret it in a slightly different way. AT&T had the globe logo forever, and they've abstracted it and abstracted it and abstracted it, and now it's kind of more like a circle than it is an actual globe. So things have changed over time. You want to kind of think through that. If you copy another logo, it will be shockingly obvious. So you want to kind of distill that down and make sure it's your own logo. Don't just copy something. They have to be unique to be successful, right? You want to think about what output files are appropriate. We are using Illustrator to do this. The reason that you would use Illustrator as opposed to something like Photoshop is whatever you create is vector-based, which means it's scalable. So if you create it at a small scale, it'll scale up to be big without creating little pixelated edges like all the slides that I have. So it'll be nice and clean and sharp at a larger scale. Generally, you're going to work in an Illustrator file 1,500 pixels by 1,500 pixels. That's usually the default. At 300 dpi. That's for print. You can then cut that logo down for web at 72 dpi at 800 by 800. You can go all the way down to a favicon style. That's the little icon that shows up when you load up a website in the little corner. It's the tiny little graphic. It's 16 pixels by 16 pixels. It's really small, but you can kind of extrapolate your logo into something like that. You're going to want to make sure you always save the AI file so that you can go back and edit it or change it. And then think about a black and white version, a grayscale version, and a color version. Okay? So we'll go through several more before we're done. Text-based, but at the same time very graphic. Graphic-based, there are certain, the whole cloud thing is becoming very popular, so there's a lot of cloud-type logos. Out there, this one is the cloud with the paperclip attached. I thought it was kind of creative. I have no idea what company it is. This cube one is fairly creative as well. I think the cube is supposed to be a C, but it might not read that well. I don't know. I just like that one. I thought it was silly. Right? So some of these might be not the best, but at the same time they're creative. They're different. Right? I like that one. So we've got a bunch here that are pretty iconic. CBS logo, pretty iconic. The London Underground, also very iconic. So you want to kind of think through that. This one, the one on there, the one on the bottom right, has something to do with laundry. That's as much as I know. I don't do laundry. So yeah, something like that. Whatever. Clean Cans, another logo. I like this one, the Leap Startup logo, combination of text and graphics, but it's pretty iconic. Um, here's another conceptualization through final product. This is a company, Jigsaw Internet, and this is a good set of kind of how the ideas come together. Do you try to abstract the jigsaw into little jigsaw pieces? What could you use some kind of a 3D logo, something like this? This was probably based in the early 2000s when Google's primary color scheme was really popular and everybody was trying to do that. Google and eBay both did the primary color scheme thing. And so it became very popular. What if you kind of went away from that? In this particular font is kind of a dated font. It's like a Stylus BT font, if I'm looking at it correctly. So things change, right? So how do you abstract it? They went a little bit flatter, right? As it progressed forward, cleaner sans serif font, right? And then they got to a little bit bolder font with one of the puzzle pieces missing, and that became the final logo in the process. But they also used the jigsaw pieces on the front and the back of the business card to kind of help identify that. So there's a lot of different directions you can go within the world of logo design. And so today you're going to explore that on your own. Okay, so we're going to continue on here in Illustrator. I need to open up Illustrator. Remember, I want CS6 Illustrator, not CS3. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and go to File, New, and hopefully I'm going to create a new document. I want my units to be in pixels, and I'm going to say 1500 by 1500. And I'll go ahead and say OK. Okay, and so now it's going to start to be a matter of conceptualizing and figuring out what's appropriate. We've already used the pen tool to draw shapes. We of course will continue to use the pen tool. I may draw some shapes with the pen tool as we go along, but I want to explore something else, which is called the Pathfinder tool. And it's probably not going to show up here. It might be here. No, it's not here. So we're going to either need to switch to advanced. I think it's under advanced. Hold on a second. No, I guess not. Okay. We'll go to Window, and here I'm going to be able to pick Pathfinder right there. And so the Pathfinder tool is designed so that I can combine or subtract shapes. And so I want to kind of work through how those things work. And so we'll start with some basic shapes for now. I'm going to have a square. I want it to be filled with no border. And then I'll create another shape. Something like that. Let's change the color so that we can see these changing a little bit. Right. So I have the two shapes here. Maybe they're not obvious enough. Maybe we need three shapes. I'm not saying that these are the most attractive shapes in the world, but I just want to use this as an example. Okay? And let's change this color. Something like that. Okay, so the way the Pathfinder tool works is it's going to allow you to cut shapes apart, right? Attach them together, etc. So we'll go through each of the options. The first one is divide. And so what divide's going to do, if I were to select these two objects, divide is going to create three separate objects out of them. And so it does group them together, so I have to get into my isolation mode. And I'll end up with one shape. Back up here. Two shapes and three shapes. So it's basically, it's cut one object into three pieces. Yeah. The first one under Pathfinder. Divide. So one of the things that happens when I divide, here, let me back up a second. Okay, so when I select those two and I click on the divide tool, it will combine these two objects into what's called a compound path. In order to separate them, I can go into what's called object isolation mode, and I do that by double clicking on the object, and you see this gray ribbon that appears at the top of the screen, right? It's telling me that I'm inside layer 1 and I'm inside group 1. Okay, now that I'm inside group 1, I can start to select the individual objects. So there's each of these as an individual object. To get back out of the group, see, I can't select that star anymore because it's outside of this isolation mode. So I click this little back arrow to jump myself back into, those are still a group and will move as a group, and I have the star. Right, so it's a little bit of getting used to. Let me jump back so that they're together again. Oops, I went back too far. Come back to here. We'll experiment with the next one. The next one is trim. And so if I select these two objects and I press the trim, right, it trims one object, the rear object with the front object. So if I now enter into my isolation mode by double clicking, I now have an object that's been basically used to trim this object. So I no longer have the middle piece. I have the whole object, which was on top, and the trimmed object, which is underneath. Okay, so let me back up again. That's good. And then we'll use the third one over here. Right, the third one here is merge. And so merge is going to do what we think it's going to do. It's going to make them one object. I thought it was going to make them one object. Maybe I didn't do it correctly. Hold on. Well, apparently it just cuts it out. That was going to make it all one object. We'll go up in shape mode and use unite instead. We'll get to that. So I'm not quite sure what merge did, but oh well. Crop is going to be to keep the intersecting area. So if I use crop, it'll keep just the intersection, which is right here, and get rid of the other two shapes. And this is going to be outline, which I think is going to create outlines of each of the curves, so that I have separate, just little outlines that have been built. Back up again. And this last one is minus the back. So if I select these two, I click on minus the back object will cut out the front object. So it's kind of the opposite of trim. Okay. In addition to that, in the Pathfinder tools, I also have shape modes. Shape modes work like Boolean operations, where I can join things together or subtract things. So if I have these two shapes, let's do these two shapes this time, the star and the background here. The first one is to combine the two together into one shape, right? So they turn into just one shape. The next one here is to subtract one from the other, which the front will cut out the back. Right. This one will give us the intersection of the two, just that piece left over. And the last one here will subtract the intersection by itself. Right? And so you can kind of see where these tools in the Pathfinder work really nicely for how you work with logos. Right? You want to have shapes, they combine together, you subtract one from the other, kind of makes a natural composition. So once I'm at the point where I have something that I like, a lot of times you'll also want some text. So let's go ahead and add some text in. And let me change the font. It works a little bit differently than the world of InDesign, though a lot of the stuff is still the same. We'll use Arial for now. I have my size here that we can go up in size. It would help if I typed correctly. Right. Now let me continue to make this bigger. If I want bigger than 72, I have to type it in. Right, something like that. So this is just the text object right now. I can double click on it to get back into the text and edit it. Right? I could come down and
do something like that. Right. I do have the ability to center the text if I wanted to. So a lot of the same features apply that would be in InDesign if you wanted to. But I can also take the type and I can make outlines. So if I go to the type menu and I go to create outlines, it will actually create individual objects from the text. I can then use those with my other objects. So let's get rid of this object for a second. All right, let's take these and move it here, right? And then I can take these like that, and I can use these shape modes, so I could subtract the ones that are in front, right? And this would then give me just this pink square with the corner cut out with these letters cut out. Does that make sense? Now the problem here is that I can't go back in and edit these letters. They're fixed. And so you want to be careful and make sure that you get the font with the correct spacing set up correctly to begin with. Okay? So there are other techniques that can help you with your alignments. Let's say that I was creating a brand new logo. I might want to see rulers. I can go to View and show my rulers, which also allow me to drag little guidelines over, so I can start to create a set of guidelines to help me. Right, something like this. We can drag this over. That. And then I can start to build up my particular shape. So let's say I'll start with a rounded rectangle tool. I want to, hold on a second here. Alright, I just single clicked so I can change some of the settings. I'm going to want my rectangle, we'll say 1200 pixels by 1200 pixels. And I want my corner radius, try it at 20 pixels. I'll say OK. And that creates my shape for me. Right. I could center my object. Like that. Let's change the color. We're going to talk color theory a little bit later on in the course. If you're in need of some help with color theory, there is a great website, and I show it on the handout here. It's colored.com, C-O-L, I always spell it wrong, rd.com. That can help give you some inspiration of what colors go nicely together. And you can kind of look through and see their presets of colors that work nicely. And if you pick a set that you like, something like this, a lot of times they'll have, you click download, hopefully. Yeah, and this one they only have the color values, so you'd have to write down the color values. Some of them, yeah, see, this one has the ability to download a color swatch, an AI file. You can actually download the AI file and it'll bring in these particular colors as a color swatch. So let me just save this onto my flash drive. No, I didn't plug in my flash drive. Hold on. Copy this, and then we paste it in here. I usually have a resources folder that has swatches. So I have a bunch of swatches that I've worked with before. This is an Illustrator swatch that should go in here. Paste it. Perfect. And then when I'm back in Illustrator, under swatches right here, I can click on the little flyout menu and say open swatch library, other library, and go to my flash drive, resources, swatches, Illustrator, and I can load up that swatch library. And there's those colors. It's a really convenient way of getting colors that should somewhat go together. So I can then pick this as a background color and say that I want to, let's add another, I'm going to add a rectangle. The last one I did was 1200 by 1200. We're going to do 1100 by 1100. Let's say okay. This one we're going to make that color. Drag this. In the center. Okay, something like that. If I wanted a border, right, I could say that I wanted pink for the border. There it is, and we wanted the thickness to go up a little bit, like that. And I can start to build up what this particular logo would be. I could make this transparent if I wanted. Going back to something like this. And then we could add in, I don't know, some kind of text. And and I could change the fill color of that text to be pink, and you can build out whatever it is that you're trying to go after as a logo, right? And so I just use that particular color scheme. I could take this a step further. I could say that I wanted a corner of this to be cut out. So let me go and have a circle here, like this. Right, something like that. A little more, something like that. And I could say that I want to subtract it. In this case, there's going to be several subtractions that are going to happen. So I may need several versions of this. We'll start with the background. So we're going to do a subtract of the background. Before I do that, I'm going to actually copy and then edit, paste in place, so I have several of these circles. And then we'll take this, and we'll subtract that. We'll take this. My guess is that it moved some of my other objects in front. So let's send to back. There we go. We're going to take this, we're going to take this, and we're going to subtract there as well. And suddenly we end up with the cutout in that corner. Okay, so we can play around with it. The point being that there's combinations of letters, numbers. If I wanted this to be subtracted from the background, right, so this became white instead, I can go ahead and select it, go to Type, Create Outlines, and then I can select the background and the letter, and once again I can do the subtraction. Okay. Now the advantage of something like this, if I've created this as an object, when I go to save it, as long as I save it as a PNG, this will be transparent. So if I put this on a different colored background, it will still show the background color through, right? So I'll go, when I'm done, File, Save for Web, and I'm going to make sure that I pick PNG. And in this case, we can see that the checkerboard pattern is showing me that it is in fact transparent on the background, which is what I wanted, and then I can go ahead and click Save. Okay, so I'm going to turn you loose and let you play around with this. You don't have to use color swatches yet. We will cover that later on in the course. I just wanted to at least expose you to, you could bring in color swatches and use them, but at least you're aware of it. So follow through with this. If you finish this early, go ahead and start looking up Charlie Harper stuff, just so that you're kind of familiar with his work. We will talk about that at length next class, so you'll be more than prepared when we get to that phase.